Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel, and today we are doing a tier list Star Trek movies ranked. This is going to be all of the original series Star Trek movies, so Star Trek 1 to 6, all of the TNG Star Trek movies, which is Star Trek 7, 8, 9, and 10, and then also just for fun we're going to add in the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies as well, those 3 films, because I have seen those movies. They were the first Star Trek movies I was introduced to, so it's going to be interesting for me to rank them among the other movies which I just watched on my channel for the first time. As you can see, we have a tier list here, and we're gonna start with the S tier, which is the best tier, and it goes all the way down to F tier, which is the worst tier. I haven't planned out where I'm going to put all of these movies, so they may move around at points during this video. And also these rankings are going to be based off of my enjoyment of the movies. It's not necessarily how well the movie is made, because I think that's a different criteria altogether. It's just my personal opinion and my personal enjoyment of these films, and maybe some of that will come into how well the movie was made as well and stuff like that. But basically it's just how much I enjoyed these movies, and I'm ranking them based on how much I enjoyed them. Okay, so let's start this tier list with Star Trek the Motion Picture, or as people call it, Star Trek the Slow Motion Picture, which I don't really agree with because I didn't find the movie overly slow. It was slow. It was the slowest movie in the franchise by far. It definitely took its time, but I actually enjoyed this movie quite a bit. And so to rank this movie, to start off our rankings today, I'm going to put this movie in A tier, Star Trek the Motion Picture. I know some people don't like this movie, some people really dislike this movie, and some people really like this movie. So I think this movie is a solid A tier. I think it is the most explorative Star Trek movie. It is the movie that made me feel the greatest sense of awe while everyone explored the universe. I think the franchise slowly developed into an action franchise, but this movie really set the tone for exploration, for this slow, unwinding adventure. And since I watched the director's cut of this movie, the visual effects in this movie were absolutely insane. They were so beautiful, some of the most beautiful, if not probably the most beautiful visual effects out of the whole franchise. And it's the first movie. I know they were updated and stuff, but still, I think this movie felt super grand. It felt like just the music was insane. It was beautiful. It was soaring. Jerry Goldsmith's score was amazing. Again, the visuals were great. All of the cast and crew were there as well, and I hadn't seen any of the original series. I'm going to be checking some of those episodes out after this video, but I thought it was still a really good introduction for people who had never seen the original series before, because I wasn't that confused. If I was going into, let's say, Star Trek Generations, never having seen any of TNG, I would have been really confused. But going into Star Trek the Motion Picture, I wasn't that confused. There was also the beautiful Enterprise in this movie. It was so sexy. It was so gorgeous. That long, like 7-minute shot of the Captain Kirk just going around the Enterprise, just looking at it in awe, the music swelling, was just a gorgeous, triumphant moment. And honestly, I think this is an amazing Star Trek movie. I don't think it's the best Star Trek movie. It's very different than a lot of the other Star Trek movies. Even going into the Wrath of Khan, which is next, Wrath of Khan is a lot more action in it than this one, which is so slow. It is so slow, but I thought the slowness really added to this movie. I didn't think it was a detriment, and so that is why I'm going Star Trek the Motion Picture in A tier. Okay, Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan. People think this is the definitive Star Trek movie, and do I agree with you guys? Pretty much. It's an S tier movie. I'll give you guys that. It is an S tier movie. It is one of the better Star Trek movies, if not the best Star Trek movie. Although it's not my favorite Star Trek movie, you guys will see which one that is later. I still think this is a fabulous Star Trek movie. I think it's the best of the... I think it has some amazing visuals. All of the nebulas and stuff was great. Khan is one of the best, if not the best, villains in the franchise. He is so menacing. The way that the actor portrays him, he's just so intellectual but so menacing at the same time, was really good. Obviously you have the incredible iconic line of Khan in this movie as well. It was fantastic. We have the Enterprise going at it again. We have some incredible directing. I remember watching this movie and thinking the directing in this movie is really good. Obviously the directing in the motion picture was really good as well, but the directing in this movie was really, really good. And he's a recurring director. I forget his name at the moment, but the guy who directed directs Star Trek 2, also directs a few other Star Trek movies, and I thought they were all really fantastic because he's such a good director. And yeah, I just thought the plot of this movie was super engaging. It didn't overdo the action like some of the people complain about the later TNG movies and even the J.J. Abrams movies just being action movies. I think why people like this movie a lot is because it still has that slowness that the motion picture had, but it adds these really incredible action sequences. The model work in this movie was great, and honestly, if people want to say that this is the definitive Star Trek movie, I would listen to them, and honestly, if you give a good point, I would agree with you as well, because this movie is amazing. And if we were just doing rankings by how well the movies are made, I think this movie may be number one. But in terms of my enjoyment, how this ranking is going to go, there is one more movie that I enjoyed more than this one. Stay tuned. Okay, so the next movie is Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. And guys, we found him. He's behind the camera. He was directing this movie. Leonard Nimoy did a really good job directing this movie. However, this movie I didn't find the most enjoyable. I was gonna go C tier for this movie because it's just, I don't know, I think it's the villain of this movie that I disliked. I just didn't like the villain at all. He was super weak. I know it was that famous guy from Back to the Future, I forget his name at the moment, but I just don't think he had anything to do with the movie. Like, he just felt so out of place. They didn't do anything with him. His death was so lackluster, but this movie also had some really good things in it. The Enterprise getting destroyed was so tragic. The Enterprise slowly falling out of the sky in flames and stuff like that. It was super sad. It was like I was losing a character, and I never felt like that for a ship before. Obviously there are ships I care about, you know, like the Millennium Falcon in Star Wars, for instance, and maybe that could be seen as a character, but the Millennium Falcon has never been destroyed. In this movie, the Enterprise gets destroyed for the first time as I've seen it. Maybe it's been destroyed in the original series before, or maybe it hasn't, but watching the Enterprise get destroyed in this movie was really, really upsetting, and it was a very powerful moment. Also, seeing Spock, I forgot that at the end of Wrath of Khan, Spock dies, and that is an incredible moment as well. Another reason why the Wrath of Khan is an amazing, amazing movie. But in this movie, we get to see Scotty have Spock inside of him, basically, because he did like the remember me thing in the Wrath of Khan, which apparently is in that movie, and I just missed it. But I thought they did a really good job with that aspect. It was really interesting. And then the whole Spock revival, he sees all his crew members, he remembers Kirk's name, he remembers everyone else's names. It's just a really amazing moment, and the score for that movie as well was really beautiful during that moment. But I think what really bogs it down is the villain, and it was cool to have a Klingon villain. It was something that I had wanted for a while. It just felt very mundane, and like they didn't really know what to do with it, because the main thing was to find Spock, and they're like, oh, let's add this villain into it, and I just found him very boring. And whenever he was in the movie, I thought it really bogged down the movie and kind of made the movie very cheesy, and so for those reasons I enjoyed it a lot less than the first two. Okay, getting into Star Trek 4. Star Trek 4 is when the franchise dabbled in comedy, and I gotta say, I really enjoyed this movie. I'm gonna put this movie in B tier because I don't think it was as good as the first two movies. I still think I enjoyed those movies a lot more, but Star Trek 4 has a lot to enjoy. It feels a lot more like relaxed than the other Star Trek movies, because this movie is basically about saving the whales, which is super interesting. You would never go into a Star Trek movie expecting the main plot to revolve around two whales, but that's what happened in this movie. They go back in time, which is really cool. I really liked the very low-key directing of this movie as well, and just the randomness of it. Like, they're just walking through the streets and they're very fish out of water scenarios, and it was just really cool to see our cast get to kind of let loose a little bit, have a lot of fun, and it just felt like they were all relaxing, because after kind of 3 more serious movies, Star Trek 4 is like a breath of fresh air, because it's very comedic, it's very lighthearted, and it was just a lot of fun. I don't think it was as grand as the motion picture. I don't think it was as well made as Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, but I do think it was a really enjoyable time, a very relaxing time for Star Trek fans, and one that kind of changed the course of Star Trek movies a little bit, from needing to be serious all the time and to letting comedy kind of shine. And I thought all the actors did an incredible job with the comedy. Obviously, comedy is very different than acting seriously, seriously, and I thought they did, because they're really good at acting in the very dramatic Star Trek movies, like the very serious ones, but they also did a really good job with the comedy in this one, especially when they're just walking around asking people for directions or looking at things or listening to music on the bus. It was just a lot of fun overall. I don't think it was the best movie in the Star Trek franchise, but I don't think it's the worst. I think it's just a very enjoyable movie. Now we're getting into the good ones. Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. It always confused me why it was called The Final Frontier. Well, I understand why it's called The Final Frontier because of what happens in the movie. It sounds like the end of a franchise. Like if you called a movie The Final Frontier in a franchise, it sounds like it's the last movie, but then obviously you have Star Trek VI coming after it. So it's a little strange to me. I don't know. It just kind of sounds like an ending even though it isn't. But I know everyone loves Star Trek V. I know you right there sitting on your couch or sitting on your chair or something love Star Trek V, and I am also going to put it in S. I'm joking. It's an F tier movie. This is my least favorite Star Trek movie in the entire franchise. I just found this movie really dull. I think there were some good moments in this movie. I really liked the moments with the villain. I thought the villain was really cool in this movie, and I really liked how he could channel into other people's fears and stuff like that, especially when he went into Spock's fears as a kid and how he was very distant from his family and from the other Vulcans because he was half human and half Vulcan. And so I thought that was really cool. I liked the bone stuff with his dad as well. That was really, really enticing and really cool. The end stuff with the god thing was interesting, but also a little bit strange, and it just kind of felt lackluster because the whole time they were talking about Kirk going to die and stuff like that, Kirk going to die alone, which does come back in Generations, which is really cool, but the whole time they were kind of building this thing where Kirk was going to be alone at the end of the movie and he was going to be close to death and his friends weren't going to be there, and then there's a moment at the end of the movie where he is alone, it looks like things are going to die, and then instantly, there's not even a time to register that he is alone, that this is what the film has been building up to. Instantly, something comes and saves him and beams him back aboard, and it just feels very anticlimactic. And this whole movie, it had good moments in it, but overall it was just a very boring experience, I guess, a very lackluster experience. It's like the movie at the start promises you a bunch of things, but then it never delivers on any of those promises, which is why I think it is faulty. I don't think it is a horrible movie. I think you can still watch this movie and have an enjoyable time. F tier is just based on these Star Trek movies, but as a movie as a whole, I'd say it's more of like a D tier movie, you know what I mean? But yeah, I do think that it is the worst one. I think it just doesn't deliver on any of the climaxes in the movie. I think it has good ideas, but none of these ideas really pay off, and I think it is the most boring of all of the Star Trek movies that I've watched. The final original series movie, Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, is one of my favorite Star Trek movies. It is so nice. The send-off for all the characters was beautiful. Just the whole movie in general felt like a really nice wrap for all of these characters, which was really cool. And so I'm going to put this movie right behind The Wrath of Khan in S tier. I think this movie is definitely S tier. I think it was just enjoyable from start to finish, and again, the ending of this movie was just so amazing. And I know you can't judge a movie based on solely the ending, you have to judge it throughout the whole thing, but the way that they wrapped up all of the original series characters was really, really well done. And the shot where all of them are just sitting in the bridge of the ship and they're just kind of all looking out, and then Kirk says something like, "Let's shoot for the stars," or something like that. He says a line which is really famous, which I don't remember at the moment, and then they blast off into hyperspace into light speed space, into warp drive or whatever you want to call it, and then boom, they're gone, and then the credits start to roll. It was just really nice, and they had like the signature credits at the end of this movie as well, and it was it tugs at the heartstrings, man. But besides that, the plot I thought was really interesting. The visuals in this movie I thought were definitely a step up from Star Trek V, which had kind of iffy visuals. I thought all the characters, all of the actors brought their A game in this movie, especially because I think they knew that this was going to be their final one. And so they kind of all stepped up. They were all awesome. Sulu had his own ship in this movie, which was pretty cool as well. The Enterprise looked awesome in this movie. The fight at the end of the movie with the Klingon general villain who was in that other ship, right, with the eye patch and stuff like that, that was a really cool fight. And also the intrigue, it was kind of like a murder mystery movie at times, and that was also really cool, especially when people like came into that ship with the gravity boots on and those white suits, and they shot all of those Klingons in the blood, like their pink blood is flying everywhere in space. That was a really interesting moment, and the way that it looks like Kirk did that, like Kirk shot the Enterprise, like shot the lasers, the phasers of the Enterprise onto that Klingon ship. It was just really well done, and the mystery was really interesting. So overall, I think this is one of the best Star Trek movies that I watched. It was super enjoyable, an amazing send-off to the cast. I don't think it's as well made as The Wrath of Khan, which is why I'm just putting it under, but I think I enjoyed The Wrath of Khan and The Undiscovered Country pretty much the same. Okay, now we are going to get into the TNG movies. These are 4 movies: Generations, First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis, 2 of which people are generally cool on, like generally agree are decent movies, and 2 of which people generally agree are bad movies. So this is probably the most controversial section of the movie, except actually my rankings of the J.J. Abrams movies might actually be very controversial as well. So this whole next half of the video is going to bring up some controversy, but please just remember that this is my enjoyment of these movies. So starting off with Generations, the 7th movie in the Star Trek franchise, and the first movie to have the TNG cast in. Obviously, it has some of the original cast in, with Captain Kirk. I think Sulu's in it at the start, and also Scotty's in it at the start. But Generations for me is a B-tier movie. It was really enjoyable. I think there are flaws with this movie. People in the comments were pointing out these like plot hole flaws, and I was like, yeah, you know what? That is true. There are these plot hole flaws and stuff like that. I thought Kirk's death was super lackluster. Kirk's death was really poorly done, in my opinion. Like, yes, he died under a bridge, not on a bridge. Like, okay, it's kind of funny, but it's Kirk's death. It shouldn't be funny like that. It shouldn't be as badly written as that. You know, it was just so lackluster. He's just sitting there, and then he says some lines, and then he just dies. And then the movie just moves on, which is the greatest crime. It only lingers for about 10 seconds on Kirk's death. There's a moment where Sir Patrick Stewart is standing and there's a pile of rocks, which is the funeral. Great. That lasts about, 5 seconds? And then the movie just moves on. There was no sadness. There's no remorse. It's just Kirk's dead now. That's the end of the movie. It's I don't know. It was just really lackluster for a character that was alive for so long, for a character that stole the hearts of many Star Trek fans, that was the hero for thousands, if not millions of people. And just to see him die like that was really kind of upsetting in a way. But besides that, Generations had a lot of really cool things. The interactions between Kirk and Picard I thought were really cool. The Enterprise crashing on the planet was amazing. It was one of the coolest crashes I've seen, like ship crashes I've seen in a long time. It looked really cool. The model work in this movie was really awesome as well. The villain I thought was okay. We had Whoopi at the start of this movie, which is awesome. We had Whoopi throughout this movie, I think, which was awesome because Whoopi is awesome. The visuals in this movie were also amazing. The score in this movie was really good as well, and just overall it was a really fun time. It did have plot holes in it. I'll give you guys that. It did have plot holes in it. Kirk's death wasn't done very well, and the villain was I thought the villain was just very mediocre, but I still had a really good time. The model work was great. Some of the action scenes were really cool. I thought the characters were awesome in this movie as well, and the Nexus was a really cool idea, and I loved it when they were in the Nexus. That was one of my favorite parts of the movie. So yeah, Generations I think is B tier because I don't think it's a horrible movie, or I don't think it's one of the worst ones in the Star Trek universe, but I also don't think it's one of the best. I think it's just a middle ground, enjoyable film. Here we go. Next up is First Contact, and I think if any of you had to guess which one was my favorite Star Trek movie, you would have probably said Nemesis. No, I'm joking. You probably would have said First Contact, and you would have been right. It's for some reason going behind Star Trek 2, but you would have been right. Star Trek First Contact is my favorite of the Star Trek movies. I think it's my favorite out of all of them, including the J.J. Abrams one, which I thought was going to be hard to beat because the J.J. Abrams ones actually have a place in my heart. But we're going to talk about that later when we get to those movies. First Contact was such an enjoyable movie from start to finish. It was it was unnerving. The action in it was really cool. The suspense in it was amazing. There was some comedy in it. There was a lightheartedness to it, but there was also a seriousness to it. The characters were really cool. The effects were amazing. The Borg were awesome. The Queen Borg, even though people have an issue with her a lot of the times, I thought the Queen Borg was really cool. She was so menacing. The way that she ASMR'd whispered to everyone was, it just kind of tugged the wrong way. It just made me feel really uncomfortable all the time. Her outfit was really creepy and really gross. I hated the things that like pinched her skin into like wrinkly creases. I hated that so much, but it also looked amazing. I hope the artists got recognition for all the Borg makeup, because the Borgs looked incredible and there were so many of them in this movie, but they looked fantastic. Data's stuff in this movie was really cool, how he was talking to the Borg Queen and how he was talking about wanting to be human and stuff like that, and how he was slowly becoming human and she was tempting him with this humanity. But I like that he said no. It took him like 0.7 seconds or something to come to terms with, no, I'm not gonna do this. I'm not gonna betray Picard and stuff. That was really cool. I really liked that there were two different storylines in this movie, one more lighthearted comedic storyline and one very serious storyline. I think it balanced out really, really well. Also, Riker directed this movie, which was awesome. Jonathan Frakes directed this movie, and I thought he did a fantastic job directing this movie as well. Like, actually, like a really incredible job, which is really strange to me. Like, how did this first-time director direct Star Trek so well? Maybe it's just because he's been acting in it for so long, so he just knows how to do it. But yeah, he did a fantastic job directing this movie. There were a lot of really cool speeches in this movie. Picard was like action hero mania, and I know a lot of people also have an issue with Picard in this movie and how he is very different to his character in the original series or the TNG series. And while I do agree that he is a little bit different, I also think it was just a really cool performance, a really fun performance, and it kind of makes sense considering that like all the Borg have destroyed his kind of life basically, and the way that this ties into the best of both worlds, how he used to be a Borg and how the anger is coming out seeing these Borg again. It really kind of affected me in a very powerful way, I guess, and his performance as well was incredible. His performance was so strong in this movie. All of these speeches he had to do, all of these cool moments that he had, he delivered exceptionally, and I'm so glad. This movie especially made me so glad that they chose Sir Patrick Stewart to play Picard, because he brings a ferocious performance in this movie, and I thought this whole movie was incredible from start to finish. Okay, Star Trek Insurrection. This one is going to be interesting. Some people kind of like this movie, and most people dislike this movie quite a bit, and so I'm going to put this movie in D tier. I don't think it's as bad as Star Trek 5. I would rather watch Insurrection over Star Trek 5. I still think it is not the best movie of all time. Obviously it's in D tier, but this movie was directed again by Jonathan Frakes, and the directing wasn't as good in this movie, which is so weird to me because he directed First Contact so well. But the directing in this movie was just kind of like iffy. It just felt like a TV episode, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You can have a movie that feels like a TV episode, and TV episodes can be really good. So maybe you just have a really good movie that just feels like an episode of the show that it's made off of. But this one didn't feel like it was made for the big screen at all. Like, it felt like it was made to watch on a TV instead of a movie theater screen, which I think is an issue. Also, the visuals in this movie were very subpar compared to the first two TNG movies, and I know a different effects studio were doing the visuals for this movie, but some of them looked really good. Whenever the Enterprise was in the nebula, it looked amazing. Sometimes there would be like smoke trailing from the back of the Enterprise and stuff like that. It would be flying and ships would be shooting at it and it would be flying through the nebula. Like, that stuff looked amazing. But then you had other things like the Data ship chase at the start of the movie that didn't look very good at all. It looked very fake. Like, these 3D models are very fake, and I heard that a lot of the movie had 3D models in it, which is very interesting to me, why they changed from regular models to 3D models. Maybe it was just cheaper or something, but yeah. And then also the final fight of this movie had a blue screen wall, and it looked like, and as a lot of comments were kind of saying, that there wasn't supposed to be just blue there. There was supposed to be windows looking out into space, looking out into the rest of the spaceship and stuff like that. But I guess they didn't really have the budget for it or the time for it, or maybe both. And so they just had these blue walls. Maybe they were green screen and they turned blue, or maybe it was always blue screen. But it just made it look so fake. It just made the whole final sequence look so fake, like it was just shot on a blue screen, as it probably was. And yeah, it was just a horrible choice. If they originally was a green screen, and then they're like, yes, let's make it blue. It was a horrible choice. But again, there were some good moments in this movie. I really liked, what are they called, the Baku or something like that, the people who lived on the planet. I thought they were really cool. I really liked their culture and stuff, their peace, their kind of living in the past with no technology. I really enjoyed that. The villains were really creepy in this movie. I really liked the design of them. While I don't think the actual characters of the villains were super interesting, I think the design of the villains were really cool with their wrinkly faces, and I like the twist that they were once part of that village, but they set off to kind of gain technology and stuff, but now they're coming back because they're decaying and they're old. I really liked that everyone was getting younger in this movie as well, and everyone was getting more joyful. Obviously, the Riker Deanna stuff was really awesome and very sweet. Riker shaving his beard was an issue for me because I don't like Riker without his beard. I think he looks too much like a baby. He needs the beard back, and luckily he gets it back for Nemesis. There was also that LaForge moment where he could see the sunset, and he's like, I've never seen a sunset like you guys have before, and he's looking at it's a sunrise or something, and then the sun's rising up and his eyes are glistening. He has beautiful eyes. It's such a shame that he always has to wear something around his eyes or like contact lenses, because his eyes are so beautiful. They're like these puppy dog eyes, and just the emotion that you could see on them, the wateriness of them. It was such a glorious moment. Also, Jerry Goldsmith's score in this movie was really nice. I really liked some of the music. It was very sweet. It was very wholesome. And there was also that stopping time stuff. I really liked the talk of the stopping time stuff as well, and how there are moments in your life where it seems like time freezes and you want to live in that moment forever, and how the people on this planet have kind of found that moment and they are living in that moment. I really liked that. It just kind of brought up some really nice memories for me when I was watching the movie. And yeah, I think there are some good things in this movie, but I think this movie is also bogged down by quite a few just kind of unfinished concepts or unfinished ideas, or just too lackluster, I guess. I don't know. It just feels bogged down a little bit by things, but it still has good ideas in it. I don't think it's unwatchable. I think some people, if they say this movie is unwatchable, are going crazy because they've never seen unwatchable movies then. But I don't think it's one of the better Star Trek movies. And finally, the last TNG movie and the 10th numbered Star Trek movie before you get into the kind of rebooted, different universe timeline of the J.J. Abrams movies, Nemesis. Nemesis I liked more than Insurrection, which means it's going higher than Insurrection. I'm going to put Nemesis in C tier. And this is probably the most controversial. Some of you are probably smashing your keyboards right now. Why isn't Nemesis at the bottom of F tier? Nemesis is the worst movie of all time. Nemesis is not the worst movie of all time, in my opinion. Nemesis was a really fun movie. It didn't necessarily feel like a Star Trek movie, but as a movie, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot more than Insurrection, and I enjoyed it a lot more than Star Trek 5. I thought the action in this movie, the spaceship battles, were some of the best, if not the best spaceship battles we've seen in Star Trek so far. They were super cool. The visuals in this movie were awesome. It would be cool to have kind of like a remastered visuals of this movie as well, but for the visuals that we got, I thought they were epic. When the ships collide and stuff, that was really cool. When the Romulan ships came to help out everyone, that was really cool. And you had the 2 Romulan ships in the Enterprise versus the other bird of prey thing. That was awesome. I thought that Tom Hardy in this movie, he wasn't menacing, but I still think he did an okay job as the villain. I just don't think he had a lot to do as the villain. I really like the concept of the villain. I really like that he was a clone of Sir Patrick Stewart, and I thought that was really interesting. I just don't think the movie made enough connections to that to make it super investing for me. Obviously, this movie has probably the worst action sequence as well in the entire franchise. It has probably one of the better ones with the starship fight at the end of the movie, and then it also has one of the worst ones with that car chase at the start of the movie. That car chase was horrible. It was filmed super overexposed, which I guess makes sense because of the planet they were on, but it just looked really gross. The car chase made zero sense. It was just there to be a car chase with a cool stunt at the end of it. I don't know. It was just a really bad car chase. I thought some of this movie felt a little slow in terms of just like, come on, let's get on with it. And this movie was very heavy on the action. So I can really understand why people don't like this movie, but personally, I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was just a lot of fun, and I thought there was a lot of interesting stuff in this movie, especially like that green thing that would destroy everything, like it destroyed all the Romulans at the start of this movie. Going to Romulus was really cool as well. The spaceship fights were awesome again. Visuals were cool. Data's death was very lackluster. I didn't like Data's death. I wish it was different. I don't know. I don't like that they're going to make Data, or they were planning on making Data like B4. I just didn't like that. I was just like, B4 is a different different individual altogether. He's not going to be Data, even though he looks exactly the same as Data and will probably talk the exact same as Data and maybe even have the memories of Data. It's not Data. It's not Data, because that's just, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I just didn't like that very much. I wish Data had a better death. But the ending was also really nice after that moment when Data, or when B4 starts to sing that song that Data used to sing, and Picard like looks at him and then he just smiles and then walks away, and then the music swells, Jerry Goldsmith's score swells, and then the movie ends. That was really nice. The movie didn't feel like an ending to the characters, I think because maybe they were planning another movie, or maybe Paramount just chickened out with the ending, but I wish the movie had felt like an ending for the TNG characters, although now I've heard that Picard season 3 is going to be that finale that we didn't get for Nemesis, which maybe will be really cool. But yeah, I think overall this was just an enjoyable movie. I don't think it was insanely good. I just don't think it was as bad as Insurrection and Star Trek V. Okay, now we are getting into the ones that are probably very controversial. A lot of people hate these three movies. But you guys have to keep in mind that I grew up on these three movies. The first Star Trek movie, directed by J.J. Abrams, is probably the Star Trek movie, and one of the movies in general that I have seen the most. I've probably seen that movie about 12 to 15 times. I watched it when it first came out, not in theaters, but when it first came out on DVD, I watched it, and I bought the DVD because it looked kind of cool. I watched it, and then I kept watching it. I kept watching it. I kept watching it. So maybe that is one of the reasons why I like Nemesis, because it kind of feels like the J.J. Abrams movies in terms of very action heavy and stuff like that, very action oriented. But again, keep in mind, there's a lot of nostalgia at play with my rankings of these movies, because I've seen Star Trek like 12 to 15 times. I've seen Into Darkness probably like 8 to 10 times, and I've seen Beyond like 6-7 times now. So keep in mind that there's a lot of nostalgia at play here. But overall, I actually really like the Star Trek, like Kelvin, I think it's called, timeline, the J.J. Abrams movies, and they are very different than the original series movies, and very different still than the TNG movies. And so if you have problems with the J.J. Abrams movies, I can see those problems. Okay, I can see those problems. But as enjoyable movies for me, I think they are all very enjoyable. I think Into Darkness is the weakest, but we'll get to that one. We're going to start with Star Trek, the 2009, I believe, Star Trek movie, directed by J.J. Abrams, and I'm putting this one in S tier. But it's at the bottom of S tier, okay? Don't get me wrong, it's at the bottom of S tier, but I really like this movie. This was one of my favorite movies at one point in time, and it still holds a lot of nostalgia for me today. It still holds a lot of these like childish like wows and whoa, like wow, look at these ship battles, and wow, look at these phasers, and wow, Star Trek is actually kind of cool. Because before I saw this movie, I had heard of Star Trek before, but I thought it was like lame person's version of Star Wars. And then I saw this movie, and yes, this movie is very similar to Star Wars in terms of the ship battles and stuff like that, but I was like, wow, Star Trek actually is cool. And watching these three movies, especially watching the first one last year, I think I watched it last year at some point, it made me want to watch the other one. And I think just in that itself, in this Star Trek movie making me want to watch the older Star Trek movies, it did somewhat of a good job getting me into the franchise, because without this movie, without having seen this trilogy of movies, I would never have wanted to watch the older Star Trek movies, and I'm so glad that I did. But I think this movie is really cool. I think the villain is weak in this movie. I do think the villain is a little weak in this movie, but I think the visuals in this movie are insane. There were so many lens flares in this movie, which make it so much fun. J.J. Abrams and his lens flares, he has like an affair with his lens flares whenever he makes a movie, but I enjoy the lens flares in this movie. I gotta admit, it's like a guilty pleasure of mine. I really like the black hole stuff in this movie when it goes down into the planet. The skydiving sequence I think is really intense, although I think when the guy dies, I'm like, why did you pull your chute, buddy? Pull your chute, you idiot, man. I think the ship is really cool. I think the final fight is really cool, where they have to blast something into that warp like black hole thing, and then the ship Enterprise flies out. The music by Michael Giacchino, I think what is his name, is phenomenal. It is so epic sounding, it is so orchestral, it is booming. I don't know, I just love this movie, and I think maybe that's just because I watched it as a kid. But Star Trek, if out of all of these movies, Star Trek, the 2009 one, is probably still the one I'm going to go back to the most. It is one that I would please like heavily recommend giving another chance. It is very action heavy, but I still think there's a lot of good in this movie that I think people kind of overlook because it is very different than the original series movies and even some of the TNG movies. Star Trek Into Darkness, basically the Wrath of Khan, but made not as well. Star Trek Into Darkness, I used to love this movie. Star Trek Into Darkness used to be my favorite of the movies, but as I've gone older, I've gone back to the original Star Trek movie, or the 2009 J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie. For me, is the one I most watch. Star Trek Into Darkness, I'm going C tier because Star Trek Into Darkness has some incredible visuals. I think the music is great. I think it has a lot of really cool moments. I really like the moment where they're blasting between ship to ship and they're going through space, and then I think Kirk gets his like visor a little smashed and he can't really see anything. I think that's a really cool moment. The Enterprise crashing down onto the Earth is a really cool moment. But having seen The Wrath of Khan now, this movie definitely rips off The Wrath of Khan. It basically is a remake of The Wrath of Khan, but just not done as well. Benedict Cumberbatch is a good Khan. I think he's probably one of the better choices for Khan that you cast. However, I still think that the other guy, I forget his name, but I still think the other guy did Khan a lot better. I think a lot of the plot points that are in A Wrath of Khan are just made a lot better technically, and in the story wise I think they're made a lot better as well. Into Darkness is much more of an action movie than Wrath of Khan, which maybe is why, and I feel like Benedict Cumberbatch never really gets to shine on how intellectual he actually is. Like I never, like obviously I can tell that he's intellectual, but it's mostly because he says it a lot in the movie instead of actually doing something to prove it. I really like the big black ship in this movie though. I think that one looks super sexy. It's such a sexy looking ship, and the way that it goes insanely fast is really interesting to me. I don't know what everyone's opinions are on that, but I thought that was really cool the last time I watched the movie, so I guess I still think it's pretty cool. And the score at the very start of the movie as well, that very faint piano score, and then when Starfleet blows up, is a really beautiful score. I learned to play on the piano. I really like that piece of music, and overall I think it's, again, an enjoyable movie. It's just definitely the weakest of the J.J. Abrams movies in my opinion, and it's an okay movie. I'm going to put it above Nemesis though, because I think it's better than Nemesis, but I think it's worse than The Search for Spock. And finally, the last movie on this tier list is Star Trek Beyond. Star Trek Beyond is an enjoyable movie for me. I think it's kind of like Star Trek 4 in the J.J. Abrams franchise. It's not as heavy as the first two movies. It's a lot lighter in tone. You know, you got Kirk riding around on a motorcycle at points in time. You defeat the villains at the end of the movie by playing some rock song, and all the villains blow up because of the frequency of the music. It's just a lot of fun. You got Idris Elba in this movie. It's a good time. It's a B tier Star Trek movie for me. It has really cool aliens in it. There's like this white alien lady in this movie with a staff, and she's really cool. I think she's actually a really cool character. She's really awesome. The Spock and Bones relationship in this movie is the tightest it has ever been because they spend a lot of time together, and so you really get the sense of character between the two. The Enterprise scene at the start of this movie is so epic. The way that the Enterprise crashes into this planet and flips over and stuff like that. It is just so cool to watch. The way that the villains are like this beehive. They're almost like the Borg in themselves, and they're in their ships and they fly through the Enterprise and they cut it in half, and then it's only the saucer, and the saucer falls slowly to Earth like this lonely saucer. It is just a really good time. Scotty in this movie is really fun. Kirk in this movie is really fun. It just seems like this movie is definitely the more comedic of the franchise. It's the first one to not be directed. I think J.J. Abrams directed the first two. This one is directed by one of the Fast and Furious franchise directors, and he does a really good job with it. It's just a lot more lighthearted. It's a lot more fun. It seems like the actors are having a lot of fun in this movie, and I do wish there was a fourth movie as well, because this movie doesn't end with an ending for our characters. So I wish that there was a fourth movie. Maybe there will be one coming out soon. I've heard word that there might be a fourth Star Trek movie coming out, but I don't know. That's kind of been in limbo for a while. And this movie also has the send-off of Chekhov, if you will, because as you may know, the actor for Chekhov died, or after this movie had been filmed, I guess. So they filmed a little bit of extra footage, and it was just of Kirk and Scotty. They were just in a bar or something, in a pub, and they had 3 glasses for the two of them, and they cheers that empty glass, and then they take a sip of their drink. And it's just a really nice little in memory of Chekhov. I don't know, it just, whenever I see that scene, it makes me really, really sad, but also like happy at the same time that they actually went out their way to film this and put it in the movie. It was just a really nice moment, and I was getting teary-eyed just even thinking about it. So, oh yeah, I think Star Trek Beyond is a B-tier Star Trek movie. I think it's just a lot of fun. It has some more exploration than the other two movies. It has some cool aliens. It has some cool stuff in it. And if you haven't checked out Beyond yet, because I know a lot of people in my comments were like, yeah, I saw Star Trek and I saw Into Darkness, but I haven't seen Beyond. If you haven't seen Beyond, go check it out. I think it's a really fun time. And so yeah, that is my tier list for the Star Trek movies. I wonder what your guys' tier list would be, and do you agree with my tier list? Probably not. You guys probably have some very different tier lists out there, and I would love to see them. Please comment them down below what your favorite Star Trek movie is. Maybe you can tier list yourself in the comments. I would love to read them. I will read all of your comments and just enjoy it, because I've really enjoyed this franchise. I hope you've enjoyed watching me watch these Star Trek movies. And we're not done Star Trek though. After this video, we're going to get into some of the episodes of the original series, and then we're going to dip our toe back into the next generation. Thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you so much to these wonderful, beautiful, amazing people right here for supporting me and supporting my channel. It really does mean a lot. Again, I hope this tier list didn't enrage you too much, but I think I am very satisfied with this overall. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time for my next Star Trek reactions.